We're in the midst of a huge transformation where peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, and I'm a partnerships manager here at AllVoices, and my pronouns are she, her, and hers. Today, I'm excited to welcome our next guest onto the show, Nadia Vatalidis. She is the Director of People at Remote. Nadia, how's your day going?
Awesome. Christina, thanks so much for having me. My Wednesday is going really well here in Johannesburg in South Africa. And yeah, I'll share my pronouns as she, her as well.
Incredible. Thank you. I am excited to jump into our conversation. I know we were chatting about a bunch of different topics for our pre-call, but before we get started, if you could share a little bit more about yourself and the work that you do at Remote. And also, I think it's fun to ask people, when you were younger, how did you answer the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, so I'm one of those unique folks that has been advocating for remote work for more than 5 years. I know it's sort of a new thing for a lot of folks, but there's also huge community out there that's been doing this for much longer than 5 years. At Remote, I report directly into our CEO, Job. It's been an incredible journey. We're definitely going through some nice, solid hypergrowth. When I joined the organization, we were 75 people in December. We now are at the 300 mark, sort of 6-7 months later. We also have some good trajectory for the rest of the year and solid growth coming. We've also just reached unicorn status, which has been an incredible achievement so early on in the organization sort of life cycle. I look at all things people, and I care a ton about humanizing like HR work. I don't enjoy policies. I don't enjoy throwing policies at people. I enjoy figuring out what people programs are going to work for the people that we have at Remote, our values, our environment, and then really work to sort of create people programs around that and build on we call it like people excellence in our people team. So creating like people excellence type programs and designing employee experiences. So that's what I manage. I also manage all things total rewards, L&D, and I look after our documentation side internally as well, which we use Notion for to create our handbook and document things really well. This is a little different in the sense that it's an asynchronous company. It's remote first. We have 18 different time zones already, just with 300 people and 47 different countries. And we're scaling quite quickly towards adding a ton more countries to our entity list. So we're aiming for about 80 to 85 entities by the end of the year. So really good, ambitious goals, and awesome to be a part of this. Your second question was a bit about what I wanted to do when I grew up. So interestingly enough, I always wanted to do architecture, and I failed. I failed. What do they call it? Technical drawings. We had technical drawings back in school and university, and I failed it completely. And even design, it just technically I wasn't there. But I love that I had these incredibly supportive parents that then said to me, like, what else do you want to do? What else are you interested in? And so I could pivot from that and ended up studying PR, not HR. So super proud to have a complete HR career at this level without necessarily like this massive qualification behind me. I later in life became more obsessed with academics, but early on was not a total academic, and also started working at a really like young age to support myself and to have sort of great independence.
Incredible. I mean, I love that. Well, now you're architecting people strategies and that experience. So, and I love that you had a supportive kind of support system and family as well. So you fast forward to now you're the director of people. Is there anything else that was part of your personal journey that really led you up until this point to choose to work at Remote and lead the people function there?
Yeah, I nearly want to say I created a bit of a pivot in my career in 2015, sort of early 2016, where I was an entrepreneur for 15 years here in South Africa in my own little sort of South African bubble. And I never dreamed of, I don't want to say I never dreamed of it. I think I always dreamed of working for an international company, but I never thought it could become real. And in 2016, I had a moment where the company wasn't doing that well. And the economy was really slow. This is a highly saturated market to be in the industry that I was in. And I remember one Sunday just reaching a point where I was literally just making money to pay bills. And it wasn't healthy. It was like quite a scary moment as an adult to be in, having 2 kids and a wonderful husband, but also wondering a bit about the future and the level of responsibility as an entrepreneur and that next paycheck. And I did from my previous sourcing days, I did a Boolean string search, and I put in like remote. I think I put in the word remote and EMEA, because this is my time zone at the time, and it still is, and recruiter, because at that point I was running a recruiting agency. I was a managing director of a tiny company here. And I decided to just dumb it down and think about being a small fish in a really big fishbowl and a global fishbowl. And I knew I couldn't just sign up for an MD role at a global company. That's not the experience I had. And I didn't even I still remember when I got an email from GitLab to interview with them. I kept thinking it's untrue. I was like, is this a scam? And the funniest thing that happened is when I got the job and I called my parents, they were incredibly supportive and excited. And my hubby was immediately like all for it. We read the entire handbook. I mean, back then it must have been only 500 pages or something insane, but it's probably 3,000 or 5,000 pages by now. But I remember like being obsessed with it and couldn't believe this is real. And then my dad saying to me, I'm so happy for you, but you found a job on the internet. Do you think you're going to get paid at the end of the month? And don't be shocked if you aren't being paid. And I think, people were like thinking around, and when I would pick up the kids from school and they would say to me, oh, what do you do right now? I heard you closed your company or you sort of shut that down. Be like, no, I work in a remote company. And I think everyone believed I was a stay-at-home mom for the longest time until nearly COVID hit. Meantime, I was part of another unicorn at that point, went through hypergrowth with an incredible company. I would not be a director of people at Remote if it wasn't for GitLab. I learned so many things in 4 years. I learned to be scrappy, to become very organized. I went through solid hypergrowth. I learned how to scale people teams, how to scale high volume, HR operational work. I learned how to deal with, at that point, cultures and amazing people in 67 countries, also probably 20 different time zones. I learned about async. I learned about, this complete advocacy for you don't have to live in San Francisco to work for an amazing Silicon Valley startup. And that entirely changed my life and my career. It also changed my sort of outlook of my future and the growth that I've experienced. So that's how I found myself at Remote. I could talk briefly about why I joined this organization. A lot of people in this industry tend to focus on a professional employment org usually creates great opportunities for other companies to unlock hiring, right? In any country in the world or the countries that they support. But Remote sees it in a slightly different way. And this is what I align with. And I share that story. We are creating opportunities for talent to be accessed in very remote and rural locations. Also countries that a lot of companies in this industry wouldn't lean into, countries that are difficult to work in and operate in and even create an entity in. And that excites me. It feels like we're willing to take that additional step to really unblock opportunities for amazing humans that wants to work for all these amazing sort of global startups and organizations and companies that are inclusive of global cultures. So I think the wealth that it creates and the really like economic wealth, but also knowledge wealth that it's creating in locations that previously would, and people that would have never been able to reach into these opportunities excite me. I am one of those folks that experience that. And so, yeah, I think that shows a really bright future. And I hope we can, as we unblock these other 80 to 85 countries, I hope we can advocate for why folks should hire in a very sort of diverse global fashion.
Absolutely. Accessibility to talent and opportunities, job opportunities is so important and very inclusive in practice. In terms of, I know one of the things that you mentioned was this move towards remote virtual first work, and it's something that is really new to a lot of organizations, and it fosters a really different company culture when you're in different places working asynchronously as well. One of the aspects we talked about is really being self-enabled. Can you define what that really means to build a self-enabled company culture?
Great question. I think a lot of organizations that's never worked asynchronously before, but also humans that has never experienced what async means or remote first means. I think they tend to lean into wanting to copy what they did in an office every day, all day. So literally like adapting the exact same meetings and just doing it online. That doesn't work well. It doesn't scale well. And it does mean that at the end of the day, after tons of meetings, you still have a huge workload to get to. So to me, self-enablement means that from day one, even in your hiring journey, really creating a remote first environment where you self-enable folks that can be set up for success by having all the knowledge available, having all the tools available, and all the training and necessary documentation available for them to work asynchronously. So they don't need to rely on a single person to access knowledge, information, documents, a program, a project, a tool, whatever that might look like, or even contact information of a vendor, right? It goes as far as that. If those things aren't clearly documented, then it's not a self-enabled environment. The other thing is this really sets up folks to be super successful in the sense that the level of independence it creates means that someone starts learning to work really well without anyone having to sort of check in on them all the time. So I think the culture of nearly not doing that is micromanagement, in my opinion, right? So I think self-enablement is exactly the opposite. It means that someone is completely enabled to do their best work without anyone else having to, ask them anything. And when no one's looking, they're still doing the right thing. I've seen this work wonderfully in remote first organizations, and I really hope more organizations would lean into self-enablement.
I think that there's a lot with empowerment in terms of managers, and you mentioned micromanaging, and it's important to define what it clearly is not as well, to understand how to foster that really creative and just self-motivated environment too. You mentioned remote and 80 plus entities, and when you're working globally, you want folks to have a really great experience no matter what that means for them. But we know that company culture and individual local culture is different in each country as well. When you think about people strategies, what components are global and what needs to remain really local as well?
Great question. I'm thinking of applying this to benefit just as a starting point, and we can pivot from there. But like, if I think about sort of people strategies around global benefits, for example, right? I think locally, there's a bunch of governance that has to happen, right? There's compliance, there is mandatory and statutory benefits that you have to meet according to that local government in that entity. Then there's the supplemental part, which creates very competitive benefits. But you also have to then analyze, okay, what is the social norms in this country? Is it normal to add like paid medical aid or healthcare? Christina, can you give me 1 second? I need to close the door. I'm so sorry. I'm gonna repeat this question. I can hear one of my kids getting really loud and having fun, but it's going to interfere with our call. 1 second.
All good, all good.
There we go. I heard it becoming louder and louder. Should we repeat this question? I'm so sorry.
No, you're all good. Yes, the question was, in terms of your people strategy, what needs to be global and what do you need to create to be more local?
Yeah, great question. I think I'd love to align like benefits as a quick example, and we can definitely dig in deeper into other people programs and other sort of global strategies. On the benefit side, if you think about like local needs are very often governed by statutory and mandatory requirements based on that particular country, and it's very different country to country. And then you can add things like supplemental benefits. However, from a social norm perspective, you need to really do analysis and research to see like what is normal in that location and what are other sort of top tier modern tech organizations doing? What is the market saying? What does your research say? Before you just go and offer supplemental benefits in some locations. There are countries in the world that's got, amazing statutory benefits that's way better than supplemental than others. And so comparing that to create sort of fair equity is quite difficult, but it's definitely possible. But then there's the global aspect. This is the part that sort of truly excites me and that creates a little bit of global fairness and also includes everyone regardless of how they hired and where they hired. And these are things where you could add like global parental leave policies. So regardless of what the statutory requirement is, meaning, let's say, for example, in one country, it's only 4 weeks, and in another country, it's 3 months or 12 weeks. If you have a global strategy and you make it more, like we do 16 weeks at remote.com, then it means that you're nearly bringing folks that are never going to be able to experience that level of parental leave in areas where they're not getting that requirement. You're bringing that up a level. In other countries, you might see that their benefit is even better. So still meeting that statutory requirement, but offering global benefits to create a slightly more fair environment for everyone. And then there are things like having global self-care days, unlimited time off, and sort of very impactful learning budgets where folks can go and spend, let's say, $1,000 or $2,000 a year on their own learning. And regardless of what that looks like, sort of a really quick step approval process, not to make it rigid, but to have that available for personal and sort of their positional role learning, etc. So I think there's loads more that you could do in terms of global policies, but this is just one example of what you can do in terms of global strategy versus very local strategy. Does that help answer that question?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important in terms of what you said to do the research, look at the insights, and then see where you want to go in terms of modern companies and really offering benefits that really are helpful to employees too. So asking what they need and really meeting people where they are. Another piece of just having people feel like they belong at a company or feel like they're included in addition to benefits is their first experience with the company and the candidate experience, but then the first 30 to 60, 90 days at an organization, which is really a hard code to crack. And a lot of people are talking about, especially in terms of remote first onboarding. I know this is something that you're really passionate about. So I wanted to ask in terms of, switching from an in-person world to a hybrid or remote first onboarding experience, what is key to ensuring that new hires, no matter what company culture they're coming from, feel like they are welcome with their people managers, with their teams, cross-functionally? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite topics by far. You spot on. Onboarding doesn't start on the day that someone joins. Onboarding starts on the day that someone accepts your offer. And so a lot of companies get that even wrong, where they kind of like get this person, speed them up to sign a contract or an offer, but then there's nothing until the day they start.
Yeah.
And I think like that's the first point. That's the first step I would start looking at if I'm in organizations that's going remote first now or that wants to adapt this type of model. It starts on that day. We've done something really simple where we, for instance, like automated a welcome email that goes out the moment someone has accepted their offer and we have marked them as hired in our ATS. The moment that happens, that welcome email goes out to say, we're so happy that you're planning to join our company. This is what's going to happen next. Set very clear expectations, nearly over communicating what to expect and how to expect it. So how am I going to get information from you? When am I going to get information from you? Why am I only getting it then? What happens before day one and what's going to happen on day one onwards? So that's usually that nice big overview. How am I going to get my equipment? Like really covering those crucial things that someone think about when they go, oh my goodness, I've resigned, I'm joining a new company. And then further to that, there is usually a bit of communication in between. Those are sometimes just logistical things, like making sure if you see equipment is like running late, if you're planning to ship, we ship all our hardware globally. Like if you're planning to do that, making sure that you keep a very close communication with the person receiving it. If it's delayed, not communicating that can create a lot of anxiety. It can also create a lot of sort of insecurity in whether they're actually going to get it or not, and whether it's real or not. So once that logistical stuff is over, we go straight to a pre-day one onboarding call. This is like a discovery call. It's a call where we say, right, you went through a hiring process, you went through the offer stage, you know what's coming next, but we want to show you what it's going to look like on day one. We don't want it to be a shock. We don't want you to be surprised. We want to show you, how do we use Slack at remote? How do we document things? What does Asana do? Why do we use modern like tech apps? Why don't we use like a very traditional platform? Weird example, but like SAP, for example, like why don't we use SAP across the whole organization if it's this mass organization that we're building? Or, you know, I think it's an opportunity for folks that maybe come from a Microsoft environment into G Suite to understand what to expect and what to look out for. Something we will be open sourcing hopefully really soon and making it publicly available is really good training for someone that is adapting a Windows machine or a different machine to a Mac, and someone that comes from Microsoft adapting G Suite, or someone that's never used Slack. How do we utilize Slack? So we're planning to make that publicly available. So good opportunity for a new hire to see all these things up front. And then day one, I think that is where everything can go really right or really wrong. All our managers, all our people managers has a welcome call in that early part of the day for that new hire that's joining. If it's in a time zone the manager is not in, they should and must arrange someone to show up at that time, whether that's someone in their team, in another team, the onboarding buddy. We have so many options available, and we have it available across time zones. So it's relatively easy to select someone, for instance, in like a time zone aligning with New Zealand and Asia Pacific, or a time zone aligning with India, or a time zone aligning with Pacific time. And that welcome call is crucial. It's that first step to say, you know, you're here, we're excited. Have you had a chance to look at your onboarding card? What did you think? What questions do you have? And what do you need from me in week one as you complete your remote onboarding? It's nearly like making them feel heard, helping them to discover information, making them feel super welcome in the call. We spent week one on remote and company-wide onboarding, and no one skips this, no matter who you are, even if you're a director or a VP or someone in the security engineering team. No one skips the first week of remote onboarding. That is where we focus on onboarding someone into our values, how we've operationalized those values, how to discover information, and how to set them up for success. And that amazing question you had earlier, how to make sure that they're self-enabled. It's not an environment where you can handhold. Most companies tend to want to do everything sync for those new hires. The downside of that is if you do that, remember, you're also creating an expectation that everything else will be sync, and it won't be. Remote first means async. It means when you're sleeping, someone else is working. When you're waking up, someone else is going to bed. And so, you know, really leaning into asynchronous from day one is worthwhile. I do think arranging that onboarding buddy, so the manager, the onboarding buddy, having social calls ready that's existing in the calendar to welcome folks, also giving them the ability to schedule a coffee chat with anyone in the organization is important, but it's more important that they learn how to discover things and how to find things and learn how to use our applications than someone holding their hands through that process. And then I'll quickly touch, week 2 starts on the team onboarding side. That is where they get their first opportunity to really start in their team and start learning about how things work in their team, and crucial knowledge about that team. Where does their information live? Why is it there? How to find it? How to sort of favorite those type of topics, or how to keep it for later? How to engage with the team? What meetings they should be at? Sort of what is important, what is less important. And it's also where the manager spends a little bit more time with their new hire. I love using work sessions and shadowing. I think shadowing is a great opportunity to help someone new to work with other teams, but both ways. So them shadowing a current person, and then later on a current well-established employee shadowing the new hire in the same type of work. So I think that's crucial, especially in roles that are either super operational or very detailed orientated, or areas like finance, etc. That makes the most sense. Yeah, so that's a starting point. It doesn't stop at week 2. That's an ongoing journey. And it's our current people team, the we call it the people onboarding team. They really are designing the employee experience, especially from that initiation on. They work very closely with hiring managers to build out week 2 onwards and start filling in the gaps that someone might not be thinking about if they're even new to a company like ours, and continuously lean heavily into async, remote first. Is it documented? Where can they find it? How will they find it? Who are they shadowing? So thinking about those things ahead of this person joining versus like on their week 2. So we plan and we have great templates built out for all of that as well.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of it has to do with timing and being super intentional about how you're interacting with folks, making sure that they have the resources. Are there any other common mistakes you see folks, not necessarily at remote, but in other companies or just in people that you've talked to about this topic, that people make when they are, going through the remote first onboarding process?
Yeah, I think if you're expecting a new hire to sit in meetings all day, every day, you're doing it wrong. There's no way, there's just no way for them to absorb information and discover things if they're continuously stuck in a meeting or a call. And it's also really difficult for them to sort of have time to settle in, to ask questions if they're continuously stuck in a Zoom call. So yeah, I think that's a crucial mistake I've noticed a few times.
I would +1 that as well. I don't think it's effective for you to shadow meetings all day long and just sit in meetings and actively participate. Zoom fatigue is definitely real. You mentioned also in your response to the other question, the importance of people managers and just understanding that they are an important part of the process too. How do you think about, training people managers in a remote first world and really building trust with folks if you're not meeting them in person?
Yeah, training is something that in the startup world that sometimes happens too late. And I think L&D sort of takes the back seat in a lot of organizations. I see this in a bit of like an ongoing way, right? And I think you need to have training available that is sort of very foundational, the crucial stuff, even how you onboard managers in that foundational training is important. And they have to have that during their onboarding as a people manager. But then the next steps to that is you really need to take it to a more solidified sort of deeper level, right? And that means having very good training and ongoing training on crucial topics like your total rewards philosophy, like how annual comp review cycles work and why, how performance and feedback sessions are held in a remote first company, how to manage people if you have people in 7 different time zones. We have relatively small teams, so we enjoy having one manager for every sort of 10 employees or IC level employees reporting into them. They could be at sort of different levels, so staff or senior or intermediate, but 10 is nearly a max for me. When you go over that in a remote first company, it's hard to have one-on-ones. It's hard to do your own work and have one-on-ones. And to be a really good leader and good manager, you have to show up. You have to be available for your team. That's the most crucial part. So I think having sort of small teams are crucial as well. But that L&D aspect can never stop. You've got to continuously build on that. You have to nearly continuously create very specialized expert level training on things that will impact all your people leaders and all your people managers in your company. And then lastly, I will just say, like, there's a couple of ways of doing that. I'm currently looking at potentially creating like coaching cohorts every like sort of bi-weekly and putting it into 3 categories. So if you think about, as an idea, your very early stage people managers, maybe new to people management, sort of one area. The second cohort could be new to remote first sort of people leaders. And the third one could be like established leaders at remote. And I think that way you can make sure that the folks in those cohorts are really getting the knowledge and sort of learning and development that they need to be set up for success themselves. Because your middle management in remote companies is your most crucial leaders. They own that buffer between executives and sort of we call it upper decks or breach team at remote. And I nearly broke off my speaker. I'm so sorry. I hit it. I'm talking with my hands. but they are the crucial aspect to setting everyone else, your crucial, people in the organization up for success. So I think that's, for example, a good idea to consider. If you can get together for offsites now and again, it's important. Right now, it's impossible. We're not out of the woods with the pandemic, but then making space for that. Even if it means, creating virtual events or really fun ways to get away from a laptop or out of their usual space to get together and to connect and to talk to each other, and to learn together.
After, training, and after you lean on the community as well, because I think that's important too when you're talking about cohorts, how do we really measure the effectiveness of people leaders, that they are showing up, that they are leading with empathy and vulnerability, and they're empowering their teams as well? What metrics or KPIs should we look towards?
Great question. It probably starts with a feedback survey. We don't have an engagement survey yet. We're planning to evolve our current quarterly sort of feedback survey to that. And I think it all starts with that, and adding divisions and departments to that soon. So if you're starting something very lean, ours take 3 minutes. It's probably 15 questions max. But if you start asking for feedback early on, anonymous, clean cut, crucial feedback, and asking maybe questions that you don't even want to know the answer to. A lot of people teams are going into that, like, sort of nearly very segmented questions that can never change, because then you can't pull trend lines. Becoming a little bit uncomfortable with that and asking those hard, tough questions is super important, and adding on it. So if you see something, make sure that the next time you launch that survey, that you're going into that uncomfortable area that you're afraid of getting the answer to, even if that is like, what will make you leave remote in 2 weeks, or what change needs to happen at remote for you to stay, or something. Yeah, or something quite intense like that. But I think that it starts with checking in with folks. When I look at survey feedback, I also like arranging calls with different teams. I love having one-on-ones with folks. I'm in a very fortunate position that people reach out to me. We still have that awesome level of trust, and which I always want to retain, that people aren't afraid to reach out to me or my people partner on the enablement side and say, I need to talk to someone. I'm worried about what's happened in my team. And these aren't leaders. These are individual contributors that care a great deal about our success as an organization and are here for the right reasons. So I'm also getting a ton of feedback one-on-one. I don't think a lot of organizations are leaning into that. I think sometimes folks sort of steer away from scheduling calls, just literally going into an area where they've seen feedback from a survey, and not reaching out, not scheduling a check-in to see, hey, how are you doing? There's very little time for that if a company is large, but at 300 people, you could still do that. You could still go into a group and arrange one-on-ones, and make sure those are private on your calendar, so folks don't go, why are you arranging calls with everyone in like the marketing team or the finance team? Like, the people team is also very conscious of that, right? But I think it's important to have those one-on-one discussions. Next, if you look at that survey data, this is not something the people team can fix. Some leaders and some executive teams and some CEOs believe like the people team should just fix all of that. That's not true. It's a company-wide effort. It should be an objective. I like using feedback, and look, we also align our values to our current quarterly people feedback survey. So every question is aligned back to a value, which means I get a rating and I get a score based on that, how someone has rated that value. Now, I can utilize that in itself to say, whoa, we're not doing very well on kindness or excellence or ownership. We're scoring the lowest in this value. What key objective can we create for Q3 or Q4 to work on this as a company, and really taking it to your executive team meeting, your weekly sort of executive meeting, and say, as a team, we have to work on this. This is the sort of trend feedback that's concerning to me and the people org. What are we going to do to work on this? What actions are we going to take? Sort of not just tangible, but what actions are we going to take to improve this now? And what can we do longer term? And I think openly sharing feedback is important. Obviously, anonymous feedback stays anonymous, but sharing the results publicly is super helpful. That brings a lot of trust forward, because then folks know even when it's hard, you're going to be very honest about the feedback you got as a people team and as an organization. And advocating for that level of transparency is really, really good. Again, I would never share anything where someone wrote a sentence out. I would always anonymize and neutralize it. At the same time, being very frank that we scored very low in a specific value, etc., is crucial for the company. And then the other thing I usually measure it by is it's trust in the teams. Is someone feeling safe? If I'm starting to see clear feedback or clear indication that someone is psychologically not safe, it means that trust has been broken in that team, and we need to start working and coaching that leader. It's not a tap on the wrist. It's an opportunity to mentor and coach and help and solve those issues, and also figure out if you have the right person in the role, or if there's potentially a different role for them at the company, if they're struggling with sort of the level of responsibility in that specific area, or whatever the case may be, working with them to do their best work. There's many other things. I think feedback one-on-one is super important. We have weekly one-on-ones, and during those sessions, feedback is encouraged, but it's both ways. It's not just the individual contributor getting feedback. The manager needs feedback as well from the individual contributors. And I think they have a responsibility to notice if 2 or 3 people told them, hey, I really didn't like X, it's time for them to even work closely with us. We have enough check-ins with all our leaders to see, how's it going? What feedback has your team shared with you recently? How can we support you with that? And that helps to make it a very sort of non-fluffy conversation and very transparent discussion to support them. But yeah, there's also many other ways that you can do this in a remote first company.
Absolutely. Let's dive into a specific example. If the team kind of shares with either their people managers directly, or you receive this feedback that people on a specific team or across the company even are feeling burned out, what can you do to really mitigate this, or in the future proactively prevent folks from being burned out? We've seen so many studies around not only you can be burned out from work, but just life in general and everything that is going on.
Yeah, I think it all starts with representation of leaders. And so sometimes when I see burnout in a team, I usually look at what is the behavior of that leader? Are they always online? Are they responding to things at crazy hours in their day? Yeah. So not working weird hours, but working crazy long hours, because there's a difference. In a remote company, you can really have the flexibility to work very weird hours. You can not work afternoons if you want and help, family, or work with, or go for walks with pets, or help kids with homework, or do something with your SO and work late in that day. But if I start seeing long hours and that behavior, could that be a reflection on what the team is seeing and potentially thinking that it becomes expected? And so usually that's where I start. If I notice that, I usually look at what are the behaviors of this leader? Has it been called out? I love that at remote, my team will ask me, why are you online? If it's like 6:30 or 7 p.m. in South Africa. And sometimes I'll say to them, oh, I'm sitting on a webinar, or I'm sitting in a cohort and I'm like going through some sort of training. And they'll be like, but you shouldn't be on Slack thing. You should be in your training. I love that my own team can do that for me. And I think, in all honesty, because we have so many public Slack channels, it's easy to notice those trends. And it starts with having a discussion with that leader. It starts with checking in on them first and making sure, are they supported? Is it expected of them? Because then there's something wrong one level up from that, right? And then I think something else that happens is a lot of people come to a remote company, they've never worked remotely before, all of a sudden they're at home and all they do is work. And especially in a pandemic where there's not much else to do, and they're sort of like, yeah, they're so over Netflix or whatever the case may be, right? They don't have other hobbies, or they're not practicing those hobbies and interests outside of work. It's super important to reiterate company-wide how you have to have a life outside of work. If you're working remotely, you have to have clear boundaries, and you have to stick to those boundaries. You can't keep changing them. If you keep changing them, you kind of allow folks to become very flexible with your calendar. A starting point for me, for example, is my calendar is completely public. Anyone at remote can see what's going on in my calendar. obviously, if I'm interviewing candidates, those things are private for privacy data. If I'm sitting in a really more sensitive conversation, that is a private meeting. But everything else, like picking up a child from school, like taking a kid to skateboarding and joining them, or family time is blocked in my calendar. And whether, that is Nadia taking a break and doing yoga, it's in my calendar to ensure someone is respecting my time. And if someone schedules over that, I have every right to decline. Those are the type of behaviors you need to start mimicking in a remote first company that I think a lot of leaders don't even know about yet. But yeah, I also like encouraging setting work hours in your calendar and nearly referring to it straight from Slack to say, my work hours are in my calendar, or my work hours are, like, and writing it in your Slack profile. Or if you have a, what do they call it? Like a little wiki about yourself. It's important that you write those things down so people can respect you. I see a lot of folks sort of really understanding very quickly, if I decline meetings during that time, that is my time. And if I schedule over that time, I have no time for myself. It means I can't show up fully as myself to work. So I think that those are a few things. I think there's some self-leadership that has to happen with burnout. I also think the whole world is exhausted right now. I really hope more companies will lean into self-care days. We tend to do them once a quarter. I would still advocate for more than that. And some of the companies are doing it once a month. Some companies are working 4-day weeks. All of that makes sense right now. So this is not normal. To work remote first in a pandemic isn't normal. And it's okay to recognize that, and then adjusting the organization's sort of outlook on that to serve people and their wellness is incredibly important.
Yeah, I like the examples that you gave too, in terms of blocking your time for work hours and sharing what you're doing with your time. If you need to drop your kids off at school, if you need to take a yoga class in the middle of the day, because that is your time to recharge and to do your best work, you need to feel like you are rested and feel like you are empowered to do so as well. Time is the resource you cannot make more of. One of the other questions I wanted to ask you too was around what you think companies should be leaning into additionally. So in addition to, self-care days and really prioritizing the mental health of employees, what is something that you're seeing in the people space that companies, leaders, or individuals really need to be aware of to be successful in the future?
Yeah, we've just signed a contract with an amazing vendor to roll out complete wellness support, but that includes mental health support and other aspects of wellness. So this could include a vendor that's offering global therapy, like with therapists and sessions for that has trauma counselors. COVID has been really hard on everyone, and what someone is going through right now, in some organizations, you might not even know what some of your people in other countries are going through, and the family that they've lost, the peers, the friends, the sort of that whole journey has been very hard on folks. The anxiety that it's causing, the fact that, there's all these variants coming out. So I think having a really good support system for clean cut therapy, trauma, and the right level of support is important. If you can't roll out a vendor like that, I would highly encourage having a clean cut stipend or an amount every month that someone can expense towards that, and the organization paying for it. That's also a really nice global benefit you can add. Then something else, this particular vendor is also offering coaching sessions for those folks that might not lean into mental health, but they are struggling through some goals or procrastination, or sort of just really need a little bit of help to reorganize their mind and their work life and nearly their life outside of work combined with their work goals. Sometimes it's just to chat to someone about life goals. It's not even about work. So I think having that space and available resources is important. We also invited a few amazing vendors to come and talk about mental health, to come and sort of create hyper awareness. And by talking about it and writing about it, and even having Slack channels for neurodiversity, helps normalize it and helps normalize the conversation. And it becomes nearly as part of our society, and that someone, no matter who they are, can belong to our organization. I don't know how many companies that's gone remote have thought about that yet. So I think those are all important initiatives. It's important to also invite those type of speakers. So if you're not an expert in it, it's okay. Like you don't need to be as a chief people officer or director of people or a CEO, but then getting the right expert on board to support you and following a journey. It's not a once-off problem. It's nearly like a movement towards well-being. Some organizations recently mentioned they created sabbatical programs. I think that's super cool. I think in a hyper-growth company, it's very difficult, especially, if you're still sort of in that, whoa, we need to hire 300 people and we have so much going on. It's really hard to do that. But I think when you sort of come up for air, it's time to consider having a 1 to 3 month sabbatical available for folks to take an actual break from work. I like unlimited leave as an additional aspect, but we actually sort of set clear minimums at remote. So we have 20 working days minimum time off, and that's a hard minimum. We don't want anyone to take under that. The reason why we did that is that a trend started where unlimited leave during COVID meant folks weren't taking time off. 1 or 2 days is not a vacation. It's not a break from work. So advocating for clear time off. Our leaders and our people managers have a responsibility to check in their team who hasn't had time off this year. It doesn't matter when they join, like who hasn't had time away from work, and advocating for that, having the conversation. I like bringing it up in one-on-ones and saying, hey, I noticed you haven't had any time off in 3 months. Are you planning anything in the next 3 months? Does I would encourage you to,
Yeah.
right? So I think like having those conversations are so crucial. There's many, many more things you can do, but those are a few that's working for us right now.
I love those examples, and specifically setting the minimum too, and having the responsibility to check in on your team as well, and having a two-way conversation to check in. And I think holistic healthcare and wellness is really important too, especially as people are going through a lot of different things in their lives right now. I know we talked about a variety of different topics today, and I really appreciate your kind of enthusiasm and thoughtfulness around remote onboarding, representation, modeling, leadership. Is there any like 1 to 2 key takeaways that you hope listeners bring with them as they are listening to our episode today?
Yeah, there is a few, but I want to add something to that one-on-one discussion you just mentioned. I think a lot of folks, when they have a one-on-one, sort of hit the agenda straight away. As I mentioned about checking in terms of time off, it's really good to also always start your one-on-one conversations with, hey, how are you doing? How's your week been? How's your weekend been? I don't know how many leaders does that. I get the feeling it's sort of, some folks are sort of, business as usual. It's not working. Folks, that's not what someone wants to hear if they're in a really stressful situation or feeling very anxious about what's happening in the world and what's happening in their country or their sort of personal life. So I think stopping and saying, hey, how are you doing? I want to check in how things are going. How was your weekend? Is there any support that you need from me? Helps to start a conversation. It doesn't mean they have to share anything with you. They don't need to share personal info, but it might be an opportunity where they say, I'm actually not okay. And this helps that leader to come to the people team and say, hey, can we send a care basket to this person? Can we make sure that they know they are supported, even, and when they're ready, they can share with us if they want to. There's no pressure, but making sure that you care for the conversations you're having. The other thing I'll just share is it isn't business as usual. It is time to do things a little bit differently. And I understand a lot of companies are sort of very corporate or not, like us, but don't let sort of governance and bureaucracy get in the way of how you manage an organization globally, remote first during a pandemic. Start simplifying things. I lean heavily into simplicity when you think about the process, removing a bit of nearly like the fluff and drama and focus on what needs to get done and simplifying that to make it easier and sort of more accessible for everyone. And then the next thing is, if you have a remote environment, knowledge sharing means you are enabling people to gain knowledge about things outside of their lane. So if you're documenting things in your organization around how something works, it means they are not just gaining knowledge in like the people group or marketing group, but they start gaining a way broader skill set and knowledge about how an organization in a remote company is being run. So I would love to see more organizations lean into documentation and knowledge sharing. I think we still sometimes get stuck in sort of a single source of failure. And that is because, you know, information is sitting in someone's head and not written down. So I would just share that as a key takeaway.
I think that's so important too, especially at hyper growth companies. Sometimes it's hard as you're growing at a super fast rate, you're onboarding a lot of folks, but knowledge sharing is really important, especially in a remote onboarding process, and to make sure people do feel included as well. Nadia, thank you so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture, and for sharing your thoughts about best practices with us. I thought it was great.
Awesome. Thank you, Christina. Thanks so much for having me. This is fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And as a reminder for folks who are listening, AllVoices believes in the empowerment of everyone to speak up, and we know it's a requirement for the company to succeed. Have a good rest of your afternoon, everyone.